recording, there we go. Okay, so good morning everybody and welcome to our free webinar for teachers. We're very excited to be able to bring Chris to you today. Chris is an expert in all sorts of different things, but mostly in teaching and training teachers. He's taught all over the world in places like Damascus, Aleppo, but also here in Spain, in Cadiz and Barcelona, and also Seville. And he's currently teaching for Ellie as a teacher, but also as a teacher trainer. And today he's going to be talking to us about teaching teenagers, which I'm really looking forward to. I'm sure you all are as well. Before we begin, I mentioned this to some of you a few minutes ago, but some new people have joined the room since then. So I'm just going to give you a little tip about using the chat box. When you want to use the chat box, go ahead and ask questions to Chris or make comments as you want. Chris can see those and he'll respond to them. But if you want everybody to see your message, please remember to click all panelists and attendees in the menu there, just above the place where you chat. That's where you can share your comments and your questions with everybody. Okay, so I'll be here, I'll be in the chat room, and if anybody joins us late and doesn't know about that, then I'll make sure I tell them in the chat. But do feel free to chat with Chris. And without further ado, I think, are you there, Chris? Are you ready?
Right. Here we go. What about that?
Brilliant. I'll turn myself off. If you need me, I'm here. Okay, give me a shout.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for getting up or coming along. I see that we've got people from Slovenia, the States, Gijón, Portugal. Just looking at a few of the places scrolling past. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to Amanda and to the rest of the TESOL-SPAIN team for getting me here and putting this on. And thank you to Ellie. This is taking part in. This is my classroom. This is an academy in the south of Spain, in Seville, and I was very grateful for them for giving me the space and the freedom to try out my ideas. First of all, you might want to have a piece of paper and a pencil handy. It's not essential, but I might ask you to jot down a couple of things. What else? During the course of the webinar, you might see that I've got yellow fingers. I feel the need to explain this first. We've been playing with turmeric with the primary children, and we've been painting, doing little pictures. There you go. There's a turmeric and beetroot stem picture. So my fingers look somewhat yellow and stained. If you don't like the content of the webinar, if you find it boring or irrelevant, you can switch off and look at something else. But I think, my first point I'd like to make is that imagine if now you're sat down, you had to watch the whole thing and you weren't able to get up, go to the toilet. Even if you're enjoying the webinar, if you find it a little bit too intense, if you find my, strange pauses and multiple facial twitches a little bit too intense for the morning, you can say, right, I'm going to watch the recording later. However, what we've got in our classes, we've got captive audiences. Our students really don't have a choice, and they've got a diminished sphere of action. They can't move of their own volition. They have to sit and pay attention to the end. So sometimes, I was asked recently in the interview at TESOL-SPAIN, and a friend got in touch last night to say they'd watched that interview, which is on that website. Do my teenagers do what I want them to do? And the answer is most of the time not. But maybe we can change the perspective a little bit, because if we're looking at a group of teens, are they doing what we want? Maybe not, but are they doing what they want? And I think most of the time that will be almost definitely not. So a lot of their behaviour has to do with surviving the classroom. Sometimes they have to block out the teacher. Sometimes they have to survive the moment. And I think that's worth bearing in mind. Okay, so first little task, I'd like you to write down the name of a couple of students, a couple of problematic students, present or past, that spring to mind. And also I'd like you to write down a couple of groups, again, present or past, that you found problematic. And as we work through, I might ask you just to come back to those and think about it. Just type in "done it" into the chat when you've done that. Done, 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 done. Brilliant. Okay. Also, I was talking about the sort of the reduced sphere of action. I mean, if you look at something like this, the power dynamic here, you guys are reduced to sort of a little box, and I've got the voice. This is the same as the classroom. It feels like a speaking activity to me, but for you, it's very much a listening activity. In order to provide an escape valve this morning, as we go through, if you have any thoughts or ideas or comments, scribble them in the text box. I'll keep looking and address some of those questions as well. So I want to kick off talking about group dynamics. And I'm going to tell you a couple of little stories. I was on a plane, and it was from, I think it's from Seville to Barcelona some years ago. And we were at the boarding gate. We took far more time boarding the plane than we needed to. I think they told us there was one queue for seats 1 to 16 and another queue for seats 17 to 32, something like that. And nobody was paying any attention. We were all trying to get to the front as soon as possible. Half of us were getting to the front and being sent back. And when we got on the plane, it was no better. Everybody was messing about with their hand luggage, trying to put their own hand luggage directly above their heads, and get stuff down, kind of oblivious to the queue of people waiting to find their seat behind them. I thought to myself that the flight attendants must think we're a right bunch of plonkers. Well, the problem there was that it was too much individual, not enough collective. And the way that might translate to our classes is you know, students all thinking about themselves, me, teacher, me, with not enough concern for what the group's doing, no awareness of the whole. So in this case, we have to try to collectivize the individuals and give them some awareness, get them considering what we're doing as a group, what we're there for. The other dynamic that I'd like to talk about is what happens when you see these day trips. People arrive at a popular tourist destination on a coach, and then they follow a guide around the city. Typically, the guide has a folder or a flag, and you can see these people. They're probably very successful people in their normal lives, but you see them shuffling about really without any direction. If you go to the bus and just peek in while they've gone, you'll see they've left their brains on the seats. The little brains are sitting there. And if you think I'm, overstating the case, just try walking past a group of these people one day, holding up a folder and saying, "Come with me, follow me, please." I'm pretty sure some of them will. And this is a case of people losing their identity within the group. So they're starting to take refuge. This would translate in your classrooms to sort of, somebody not knowing what page they're meant to be on, even though the page has been told to them 3 times. And here, with this dynamic, what we're trying to do is we're trying to individualize the collective. We're actually trying to draw people out in terms of thinking for themselves. and being sort of autonomous, having agency, being self-responsible. So these are the two dynamics, and these are the two processes we'll need to be doing, either collectivizing the individuals or individualizing the collective. And I think that whether you're paying attention to this or not, every group that you teach will lie somewhere on the spectrum between these two. So you might want to think about the problematic groups that you've written down before. Think about where they lie on the spectrum between these, and that can help orientate your actions. Another dynamic is an extension of the group thing, is when a group goes kind of feral and you feel they've turned on you as a teacher. Again, this is an extension of the sort of diminished sense of responsibility that people can have in groups. And there are some things that we can do to try to avoid the situation escalating or degenerating into a teacher versus group, teacher versus class situation. I think the biggest thing we can do is to try to avoid telling groups off as a collective. Because in each group, you've got students who are behaving, who are doing exactly what you want, some who do sort of what you want most of the time, some of the time, and a few that might be doing things that you don't want none of the time. But if you stand there and tell a group off, you guys, what you're doing is you're actually forcing them into the same category. And people who didn't really see themselves as you know, comrades or allies before, suddenly realize that they're being lumped together. So we actually do this a lot of the time. We force groups together against us. So my advice is to try to deal with individuals, try to highlight the importance of the relationship between individual students and their teacher's judgment. And so we're cutting through that pack thing. And I think that goes a long way to help establish ourselves with a group. The problem is that it takes time. And so that's why we often don't get our groups to where we want them until we've negotiated with each and every student. There are little tricks we can do to try to highlight that sort of one-to-one relationship with students rather than with the pack. And I'm going to give you a couple now. One of my favourites is little meetings. So little meetings at the end of the class. So for example, you know, Helen, Paul, Michael, can you just stay for a second? You know, what teacher, what, you know, Helen, I saw you did have the answers to the listening, even though I didn't ask you. Well done. Is that it, teacher? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Paul, you brought a pencil this time. Well done. And I brought a pen as well, teacher. Yeah, very good. And Michael, yeah, you're getting better. You were good on that speaking activity. I mean, these are all good things, but what we've done is, you know, the students, oh, thank you. We've started to accentuate, we've started to emphasize the relationship between their performance and our evaluation as teachers. We can have one-to-one moments in the class. We can have our students transitioning to sit next to the teacher. And I always try to keep a spare teacher-style chair spare next to mine. So the message is, you know, you could be working with your colleagues, but you could also be here showing me something, reading me something. And the students get to transition. And if you think about that diminished sphere of action I was talking about earlier, you know, standing up and moving across the class might be the most movement a student gets in a lesson. I think it does come as appreciated. And we also have, you know, meetings before lessons. I mean, typically we wait and we wait until somebody's misbehaving in a lesson, and then we try to be reactive. But if you think about it, most of your students who misbehave have probably misbehaved in the previous lesson as well. So there's no reason that we need to wait until there is behaviour. We can break those rules ourselves, and those default. We can ask a student who was misbehaving to come in at the beginning of a lesson, before the lesson starts. Hey, can you remember last time you were, and talk to them then. And if we do that, we can often talk to them in a smiling way, because we're not yet frustrated. Somebody who's talking to you and smiling and is relatively stress-free is a lot more attractive as well than somebody who is, taught with tension. So I call that sort of fronting discipline, fronting classroom management. So with respect to reaching individuals, I think we've got 3 angles primarily. I'm not saying this is necessarily best practice, but I think it's a reasonable description of what happens. So I like to conceive of it as a triangle. So we've got the triangle here. In fact, you can sketch out this triangle, if you like, on your piece of paper. Just do a standard sort of triangle. Put at the top here, just write an M. In this corner here, write SO. And in this corner here, write a T. So we've got M, SO, and T. It should be looking like something like this. So at the top, we've got marks. We've got fear of a fail, the promise of a pass. We've got reports. This is the numerical incentive we give to students. They want to pass the course, they want to do well in their exams, they want to get an A or a 10 or a 9 for their writing. And that can be a big motivating factor. And while we're there, while we're talking about that, we often sort of think about passing and failing an exam, passing and failing the course, but you could introduce the idea of passing or failing the lesson as an event rather than a test. So for instance, I was working in a private university some years ago, and I couldn't get the students to do pair work, couldn't get them talking in English. I thought, wow, this is these are university students. And then I thought, they're undergraduates. I'm actually standing in a teens class still, because they're 18 and 19. So I introduced the idea. I said, guys, every lesson is an evaluation in itself. So so at the end of the lesson, you'll have a P or an F next to your name, which shows whether you passed or failed the lesson. Now, primarily, this was a behavior modification strategy, because the most important thing was not whether they passed or failed the lesson at the end. It was halfway through, I'd tell them, I'd say, look, you're failing this lesson at the moment. What you need to do is ding, 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 in order to pass it. And then whether they passed or failed the lesson at the end, I didn't even process that further. So we're just framing, what we're basically doing is framing a request that somebody changes their behavior. So that's the marks, the reports. Down in the other corner, let's go to this one. We've got the teacher, and you see I put a little heart there. Yes, some students will respond to the teacher figure, the default authority that comes with that. Some students will respond to you as a person. But I think the primary concern, primarily students are concerned with whether or not the teacher likes them. And there's a writer, there's a book, it's called Troublesome Children in Class, written by Irene Kaspari in, I think, 1976. and it's a lovely, insightful book that you can get secondhand still. I'm not sure if it's being reprinted. And she makes the point that that's the primary concern in a class of teens. Does the teacher like me? Now, for about 3 or 4 years, I was in the habit of asking my academy students who their favourite teacher was at their regular school. And typically, the profile that they came up with was, it was the teacher who wasn't afraid to tell them off and kind of embodied the institution's rules, sometimes, you know, the growler of the school, but the teacher that, after they finished telling you off, treated you as normal. And it always used to come up that the profile of the teachers they disliked the most were the ones they felt harboured a grudge. You know, the typical, that teacher's got it in for me. And it's not always obvious to teenagers that their teacher doesn't have a grudge. I mean, to us it's obvious, of course we don't hate our students, but I think teenagers need that reassurance. And what I try to do, and what I recommend, is making that explicit in your teacher talk, in your dialogue with the students. So we have a student and they're rocking backwards and forwards on their chair and making quite a noise. It's, you know, John, I like you, but I'd like you more if you stopped banging your chair. So he's got that reassurance within our teacher utterance. And I think that goes a long way. It might feel strange at the beginning, but I mean, I found it very effective. When students get an answer wrong, no, it's not right, but I still love you. After a while, they even internalize. I have my students, no, it's not right. I know, you still love me. And we move on. So, just if you are speaking to somebody in a positive way, it gets your brain moving in a positive way. Again, if you've got a particularly difficult student, my advice is to, you know, to insert "my friend" in your sentences. Pablo, my friend. And you've got something nice in there as well, a little bit of reassurance, and it gets your brain moving in a positive way. So that brings us to the last bit here. This one is the significant others. Now, it would be nice if we were the most important person in our students' lives. We'd love that, but we're not always. And sometimes, I mean, our default is, oh, you know, you're not doing what I want, I'm going to tell your parents. But sometimes the most important person for them might be their older sister or brother who's in the class down the corridor. So they might not want to get sent outside or kept after the lesson because their older sister or brother will find out. Sometimes if we're in a centre, maybe a student doesn't care much what we think, but maybe they care what the secretary thinks because the secretary has known them since they were 4 years old. It might be that if we're teaching in a school and the class has a form tutor, that they have a strong relationship with their form tutor rather than us. I think what we need to do is to be able to harness those relationships as well and use them to our advantage. And that's especially the case where you're doing maybe off-site lessons in a school. So if you're doing sort of extracurricular English in a school and having reduced groups, sometimes with these classes that there are no reports. And I've done this, you know, numerous times over the years, and typically there are no marks connected to the lessons. In which case the students think, oh, you know, maybe it doesn't matter. Or with the significant others, they think you don't know any of the other teachers in the school. So it's very important to be plugged in. And I think communicating with administration staff, course tutors, heads of department. This all builds because this is where your out of class discipline work can be done. Okay, I'm going to stop talking for a second, just to give you a breather, and invite a few questions, and then we'll move on with this thread. Any questions? Does that make sense to you? Does any of it sound plausible, useful? How do you avoid spoiling your favourite students? Okay, we'll come to that one. Chris, what was the name of the author and of the book? I'm going to type that in there, posterity. What about that? Irene Caspari, troublesome students in class, I think is the title. You're very welcome, Sherry. How do I avoid spoiling my students? Yeah, that's a great question. I'll come to that now. Okay, the same way. Okay, you're planning for a problematic class, and you're planning for a problematic class. If you think about one of those classes that you've written down at the beginning, I believe that even before the class starts, you have in your head the faces of a couple of the problematic students. When you think about that group, ding, ding, they sort of burn into your brain, the image of their faces. And it's very difficult not to have them in mind when you plan the class. Or we go the other way, and we think of our favourite students in the class, and we plan for them. So it's part and parcel of the same thing. Now, in the background, very small, you might be able to see something behind me on the wall. It looks like a wheel. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. So this is my wheel of fortune. These are the faces of my students in one class. And the wheel turns. Like this. Now, I got the idea from the Wheel of Fortune in Carmina Burana. And if you go online and look Carmina Burana, 1975, Carl Orff, you get the O Fortuna song. And at the top you have the monarch, and then as the Wheel of Fortune turns, the monarch is the past monarch, the dead monarch, and then you get the future monarch ascending. What I do before I plan my lessons every day is I turn that wheel, and I have one wheel for each of the groups. Maybe you can see them, maybe you can see them up there. I turn the wheel once. So every day I'm looking at the face of a different student, and I prepare the lesson thinking about that student. I prepare the lesson pitched for a learner of their level. During the class, I try to make sure I speak to that student, and any roles, being the teacher, etc., they get to do it because it's their day. The next lesson, before I plan the lesson, I turn it one more time. I don't spin it, just turn it once, and I plan the lesson for the next student. So that is how I try to make sure I don't, spoil the good ones. And also, to tell you the truth, recently, this year especially, I've realised that our true allies are often the quiet students. You can get the quiet students on board. Their support is different. They're working on a different frequency, but it is useful nonetheless. Somebody I saw a question. How do you deal with sarcastic students? Which is a very sweet question. And I'm going to use an analogy to answer you. This is what I call mountain pass politics. I used to do quite a lot of hill walking. I'm frightened of heights, but I end up going up these, small mountains quite a lot. And I've noticed that when you're walking on a path up high and somebody is coming the other way, you nearly always say hello to them. And you nearly always say hello to them before they get to you. And the reason is probably twofold at least. Firstly, you want to be reassured that they're not some kind of psycho that's going to push you off the mountain. And secondly, you might fall, break your ankle, and it might be this person in 3 hours' time on their way back that gets you down to safety. So up at 2,000 meters altitude, things are very clear. You make them very clear. If you bring that same situation down to the city, in the city there are so many people, so many different conventions, so many things going on. You're walking along a thin piece of pavement and somebody's coming the other way. You don't say hello. They're just another person among thousands. You probably just move a little bit and accommodate each other. I think the same thing happens in classrooms. There are so many people, there are so many rules that often things go unspoken. So you walk into a class, you've got 3 teenage girls in the corner, they're giggling. You ask yourself, are they giggling at me? Well, I'm not sure. I prefer they're not giggling anyway. So I'm just going to ignore it. It's very easy to pretend something isn't happening because you don't want it to be. Then what happens is the students see that they have a small area of freedom in which to operate because the teacher's behaving as if they weren't doing what they're doing. So they have this bubble of space. And what we've got is like an invisible wall that has now sprung up. It's much easier, I think, if the teacher comes and says, hey, what are you laughing at? Are you laughing at me? They're probably not. But even if they are, yeah, well, I prefer you didn't. Or no, teacher, we're not laughing at you. Okay, but you are distracting me a little bit. You're putting me off. So, try not to do it. And then we've made that explicit. Now, I did have a situation 6-7 years ago in a school where I had some students who were speaking to me in a sort of mock British English accent and giving me silly, sarcastic replies. Just the same, I went up 2,000 meters in my head and thought, let's just describe this behavior as it is and speak normally. So I went over, I said, hey, why don't you just say hello to me normally? That would be nice. And it was very disarming. I think when you just make things explicit like that and speak frankly, it was like, oh yeah, okay, teacher. So that's my advice. It is to if somebody is replying, sarcastically, hey, tell yourself, I still love this person. Have a word with them. 2 years ago, in this very same class, I had a student. I kept her at the back. I said, hey, Anna, I think you're a wonderful student, but I'm not sure if you've decided that you like me or not. I'm not sure if you've decided that you're on board with this teacher or not still. She said, no, I'm okay. And then, but we're describing behaviour as it is. Does that make any kind of sense? Yes, groovy. Okay, I want to tell you another analogy. The analogy that I'm going to tell you now is, I call it cloud hammer. Cloud hammer is the image I use, and I'm thinking about a hammer literally formed out of air, out of the ether above our students' heads. And I use the concept of cloud hammer to represent the teacher's growing frustration in the moment as a class doesn't do what we want them to do. So a class is sort of giggling, messing about, they're doing what they need to do to get through the 60, 90 minutes, and the teacher's getting a little bit tense. They're off task, they should know. How can they not know that this is not good enough? Cloud hammer is growing. Some of the students are joking. It's getting louder. In a minute, cloud hammer's going to fall. And then, boom, cloud hammer falls upon one student. The teacher gets very angry, tells one student off, maybe sends them out, and everybody else falls into that sort of hushed, subjugated silence. And it's kind of, the teacher's sitting there thinking, well, if you behaved like this to begin with and done the task, I wouldn't have had to have got angry. Now, cloud hammer is fine, but the problem is that I don't think our students can see cloud hammer. Only we can. It's amazing that students, teenage students especially, can not see what's coming up. They have teachers in front of them, adults in front of them the whole day. So they get used to also having to try to ignore those adults some of the time. It's much easier if we confront the discipline at the beginning of the task and make it explicit. So, for example, we set up a task. At the beginning of the task, we say, right, I want you to do this, this and this. This is the task. There are 3 things I don't want you to do. And they are this, this, and this. And if you do them, I will still love you, but the consequences will be A, B, C. But I'm sure you won't do them now because you're far too intelligent, and I've explained it to you. And what we've done is we've expanded our rules. We've expanded the activity to include sort of tangential behaviour and conduct. And we can do it with a smile at the beginning of the class because nobody's done anything wrong yet. The students can listen non-defensively because they're not being told off. And we're laying out structure. And I've found whenever an activity has gone pear-shaped, has gone skew-it, when things have degenerated, it is always when I haven't done that. And it won't guarantee that every activity works, but it's a lot easier laying out some of the possibilities at the beginning than it is being reactive when you're starting to get frustrated and tense in the moment. Let's have a look at some comments here. It's up to us teachers to avoid that cloud hammer. Yes, Melita, yes, I agree. But it's difficult, yeah, because it will always get you sooner or later. So I think that the trick is to try to, when you are getting frustrated, if things have gone wrong, just to pull back from the edge of your own tension. Try to find a smile, and then with that pulling back, you regain a little bit of your cognitive flexibility, and you can come up with something interesting. So I'll give you an example of this. and this, I'm going to use another analogy, which I call resetting jelly. If you're making jelly, you get your jelly out of the mold, you want it to be standing up. Sometimes your jelly will come out and it'll just flop. It won't turn out the way you wanted it to. When it doesn't, the answer is probably not taking a hammer and smashing that jelly up some more. Now, if you'll forgive the level of violence inherent in the analogies, what I'm trying to say is that there's no point adding to a destabilized class situation. There's no point adding more destabilization by the teacher shouting and becoming upset. You're just adding crazy on crazy. For example, I was teaching a group of tweens. So they were sort of between primary and secondary. And they were meant to write 6 sentences using the past and illustrate them. And things had just escaped me. I had one student was sat in their chair, hugging their knees, giggling, sort of catatonically. It was something like, that was the sort of level of catatonia. Another one had turned in her chair. Another was just gently rocking. The pieces of paper were all, one of them had they'd had a pen war. I'd lost the group. And I sat there, I thought, right, I can reach for cloud hammer, have a cloud hammer moment and really tell one of them off. I thought, which one? It would be like, it wouldn't really be fair. So I thought, okay, pull back. If your jelly doesn't come out right, instead of smashing it up with a hammer, we put the jelly back into the pan, we heat it up again, and we pour it back into the mold and allow it to reset. So I let the silliness come to a close. I said to the class, look, there's something I forgot to tell you, and it might make a difference. I said, if you knew that piece of work that you've just done was going to be one of the display pieces that I'm planning to show your parents on Parents' Evening and have on the wall for your course tutors and other students to see, if you knew that, would that make a difference? One of the students, he sat bolt upright, the one that was hugging his knees. He said, teacher, I couldn't do it very well because I only had this little pencil. I said, that's no problem. You can borrow one of my teacher's pencils. So I gave him one from my table. The piece of work they did, the second piece of work, was perfect. That's just an example of us resetting, pulling back from the edge of frustration and finding a slightly more inventive, imaginative solution than just adding verbal violence to an already destabilized situation. Let's open it up and have some of your thoughts here. Does any of that make sense? Do you have any more questions? You're very welcome for the advice, Melissa. Okay, question from Marla. How do you get your students to produce more language when they're doing speaking exercises? Neeraj, hello my friend, how are you doing? Can I do the catatonic laugh again? I've got a number of catatonic laughs and I use them all. There's a high-pitched one, which they find amusing as well. Okay, how do we make sure students produce language? That's nice. We're on to task design, not just classroom management. So this is another level of technicality. Okay, so a train runs along tracks. Here are the train tracks. And what happens is we have switches in train tracks. So they switch and the train goes this way or that way. If you're working in a class where there are groups of students who share the first language, like most of us are here in Spain, the L1 is fairly homogenous, then they will speak in L1 at some point. But I think what we need to do is build into our task design those track switches, so that even if they've lapsed into Spanish, into Catalan, halfway through an activity, there is some reason, there's something they have to do in English that pushes them back. So, you know, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, speak in pairs, then we bring it back to whole class and they report back on what they said, for example. Conversation in pairs, the mere fact that they have to ask the questions in English provides a switch back to English if they've lapsed into their first language. So the more times there are stages in a task where they need to do something in English and something that has a consequence, then the more likely we are to get them continuing to produce language in English. And also to try to give a sense of consequence to every stage. So I'll give you an example. Give you an example from a recent class. I've had lots of students coming back from exchange trips. A few of them have spent a month in Ireland. There was an exchange to Exmouth recently. I even had 2 sisters come back from Paris where they'd been for a week. When they come back, I try to make it a special thing and have the other students ask them questions. Now, we can build in track switches and consequence to that task. So I asked the students, prepare 8 questions for Angela, who's come back from the UK, and then show me the questions. So 1, we've got consequence to writing the questions. Then Angela sits in the centre of the class and she answers those questions. We go around, she says, yes, would you like, you know, ask me this, ask me. The students have to make notes on the answers because they're going to write a report afterwards. So the fact that they're going to have to write gives a sense of consequence to asking the questions. So they're writing down what Angela says. But I also say, listen, if this student here asks, did you like the food? And Angela answers. If another student asks, did you like the food later? Angela is not going to answer that. So you need to listen to all the questions to make sure that your question hasn't already been asked. So we've given a sense of consequence to listening to the other questions. After the interview, the students have to write up a mini report about Angela. So that gives a sense of consequence to asking the questions, to writing the notes. Once they've done that, the teacher says, read it to me, which gives a sense of consequence to the actual writing. After that, they need to take the writing, the corrected writing, they need to select keywords and put it into a little schema, you know, the little circles coming out from a sort of mind map style schema. They have to choose 5 keywords from each paragraph or idea, and then they have to practice. Then they come to the teacher at a later date and they give a presentation, a short monologue, just using their notes. So that gives a sense of consequence to looking at the corrections. So in every stage there is, I think, teaching teenagers with task design is about giving a sense of consequence to each stage. And that's how we get more language production, that's how we keep them in English. Let's have a look. What have we got here? Is it, from Teresa, is it a good idea to involve students to help make up classroom rules at the beginning of the year? And another question from Melita, still thinking about letting students know we like them. Been doing that, and I must say it works, and it makes a huge difference, not only in their behaviour, but also in their learning. Thank you. Yes, I agree with you completely. Classroom, what do we call them? Classroom contracts. Interesting. I don't think there's any harm, and if it works for you, yeah, great. And I think Niraj does classroom contracts. I know he certainly does, who's here with us. I know he certainly does roles, and he gives all his students, in his young teens classes, he gives them all a role as well. The take I've been using recently is a slightly different one to classroom contracts. Because I've been telling students, look, by virtue of the fact that you've crossed the threshold, that you've come into the class, you've already agreed to the terms of the classroom, to the rules, because that's the institution's rules. And I'm just the institution's representative. So it's not me, it's the whole school. We have the same rules for every class. And I've been running on that sort of default system. And also, I don't want to let my students into my own discipline systems too much. I don't want them to become expert players of my system and using, you know, the institution or using any kind of agreement against me. So I have to live and work by the institution's rules, and they do too. However, if we're talking about collaboration and collaborative classroom management and discipline, there is something I do like to do. And that is, I like to make the report writing a collaborative activity. So I have digital reports, and I will show my students their report comments or how they're shaping up 3 months before they get their reports. I say, look, this is how your report comments look at the moment. You know, and if it's not good, sort of, you know, I say to them, do you want to work with me to try to change that? Yes, teacher. Okay, and then I make it specific. So what I need you to do is this, this, and this. And we make it time specific. We make the activities, you know, the change in behavior very specific. We tell them exactly what we want them to do, how we want them to do it differently, and what the consequences of that will be. So recently I had a student who was making funny noises in class, kind of high-pitched, moaning noises. And I said, look, you know, have a look on the reports. And I showed him, and I described it, you know, so-and-so is making a series of high-pitched moaning sounds which carry a strong sexual connotation. I mean, that's what he was doing. It was a strange sound to be coming out the mouth of any human being, really. He was mortified. But the reason he was mortified was not because I'd accused him of anything. It was because he'd seen that I was able to capture it in words. And there was another comment earlier, you know, always be explicit and specific. I think yes. So I said to him, look, if you want me to get rid of that, I want 4 lessons from you with nothing coming out of your mouth that wouldn't be suitable for when you're having lunch at your grandparents' house. And that for a teenager is very tangible, very easy to follow. He did it, I took off the comments. So yeah, I think describing behavior as it is a very useful tool. Sophie, I like the idea of train tracks in activities. Sometimes my students will do the activity in English, but will redo the task in L1 very quickly. Any tips on how to stop them doing this and feel more confident in L1? Not sure I get you quite there. So they're doing the task in English. Maybe you could clarify that for me, Sophie. Niraj from Barcelona, from the British Council, thank you very much for being with us. See you soon. Okay, so Sophie says they do the task in English, then they repeat it in Spanish. I was in the UK recently at a talk by a gentleman called Jason Anderson, talking about translanguaging, and I loved it. And I think the more fluidly we can move between Spanish and English here, or the students L1 and English, the easier. So if I have students talking in Spanish, I'll just listen. I'll even write down something that they say, and then afterwards I'll go over and say, hey, guys, how do we say this in English? And then suddenly the person who said it might click on, wow, that was me. And so we can use that language, that Spanish that comes out of their mouths is what they want to say. And that in many ways is our raw materials. So if they are speaking, yesterday I had a group of pre-intermediate teens in the classroom. They came in, they were speaking in Spanish at the beginning of the lesson. Sure, I'd love it if they came in and they just spoke in English to each other. But they were speaking about their stuff in Spanish. I just listened. I pretended I was organising my papers. I took notes. I wrote down 4 or 5 things that they said. Then that was our first stage of the lesson. I said, hey, so how do you say, in Spanish it's me han castigado sin móvil, which is, I've been punished because they've taken my mobile away. So I said, how do you say that in English? And we wrote it down, and we did some language work with it. So take the Spanish they're using, embrace it and use it, would be my advice. Okay, let me take a last round of questions, and then I'll let you all get on with your day. You're very welcome, Nimrod. I'm pleased you found it useful. Thank you, Naomi. Okay, so by all means, get in touch with me. What have we got? How do you feel about the use of L1? How do you feel about the use of L1? It's gone, let me find it. During tasks. It's what students, it's what they have to work with. Their use of L1, I think it tells us what they need in terms of language. And also, if we're very tuned in, when they start to use L1, it tells us where they're at. So I think if we change our perceptions and see their use of L1 not as an obstacle, not as something to suppress, but something to use, and we move in and out of their use of L1, I think it's a wonderful thing. So I personally, I know a lot of schools have English-only policy. It's not something you hear me saying in my classes. I'm happy to embrace L1 use, but also, obviously we're there to practice English, so providing the focus is right. So people, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'm chris.roland@gmail.com and continue the chat. Strength and energy for your teaching. Enjoy yourselves, And thank you, Amanda, very much for setting this up.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Chris. Let me just make myself a bit bigger. Thank you very much indeed for that. That was full of useful advice. I'm definitely taking some things away from that for my classes. And thank you everyone for your questions and your comments in the chat. I've just got one more thing to say before we say goodbye today, and that's just to remind you that we have another webinar, this time with Mark Hancock on the 26th, which is Saturday the 26th of May, and that will be at 11 o'clock in the morning. So keep an eye on the TESOL-SPAIN webpage or our Facebook page or Twitter for the link for that. It's also in the TESOL-SPAIN newsletter, which went out last night, if you want to register. Again, it's going to be another fantastic webinar, just like Chris's one. So thank you ever so much, Chris. It was wonderful, as usual. And I'd just like to say goodbye to everybody, and feel free to get in touch either with me or with Chris if you have any further questions. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.